Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here in this macro algae session. For those of you who know Erd, I'm not Erd. Erd sends her apologies, she can't be here. So my name is Philip James. I'm from Nofima in the north of Norway. And the work that I'm going to present here is part of the AquaVitae project. I'm the coordinator of the project, so Erd has kindly asked me to present. So when I'm talking about ocean rainforest, imagine I'm speaking on behalf of Erd. And when I introduced, I actually expanded the title slightly, and we included some of the production work we're doing in the North Atlantic, and that's from Nofima. Just very briefly, AquaVitae, it's a large EU project over 4 years. We're 2 years into the project. It looks at increasing sustainable production of low-tropic species right across the Atlantic and different value chains. You can see the value chains there. We're obviously interested in the macroalgae value chain here, and we have 2 case studies. One is actually, you're going to hear from Gonzalez shortly, which is case study 1, but case study 2 is the one we're going to focus on today, and that's this offshore cultivation of kelp, and focusing on Saccharina latissima, sugar kelp. The project also has a whole raft of cross-cutting case studies, and macroalgae fall into almost all of those case studies. So we're looking at value chains, biosensors, product characteristics, sustainability. All those things are really crucial in terms of macroalgae, policy and governance as well, and analysis of the value chain itself. So in case study 2, we have 4 specific objectives. The first is develop an alternative protein source for abalone feeds. Remembering this is an all-Atlantic project, including South Africa, including kelp as an alternative dietary ingredient. Second one is to find suitable sites for large-scale offshore kelp farming in the Atlantic Ocean. Thirdly, to reduce the cost of production through mechanisation and reuse of aquaculture equipment, and upscaling this offshore macroalgae cultivation specifically in the Faroe Islands. And I've added there applying these results. So I'm going to very briefly cover applying these results from AquaVitae in the north of Norway, which is right up inside the Arctic Circle, and the opportunities that we see there. Many of you are probably familiar with Ocean Rainforest, a very well-known company based in the Faroe Islands. They have 2 sites there. One is very exposed in a depth of 70 metres. One is moderately exposed with 35 metres depth. They have some interesting water temperature characteristics. Faroes is really interesting. It's very similar to what we have in the north of Norway, even though they're significantly further south. Standard salinity, strong currents 1 to 3 metres, maximum wave heights of 8 metres, so these are very exposed sites, and wind speeds of 62 metres per second, so that's fairly exposed. They've developed these macroalgae cultivation rigs for either exposed sites or more sheltered sites, and not only is it site specific, but they grow different species in the different rigs as well. And they're now through to second generation, what they call these Mac rigs 2, which they have installed in the Faroe Islands. So just to address each of those objectives one by one. This was the first developing alternative protein sources for the abalone industry down in South Africa. So they send a significant quantity of macroalgae produced in the Faroe Islands down to South Africa, where they included them in abalone feeds. We have 2 partners down there, Rhodes University, and I'm not so familiar with this, so if you're interested in this specifically, we have Cliff Jones from Rhodes University here in the conference. And Marifeed is an abalone feed company in South Africa who so included it in the feeds and looked at the biosecurity issues as well. The second task was finding suitable sites for large-scale kelp farming in the Atlantic. There were 2 pieces of work done there, one focusing on the Faroe Islands with Fiscaling, another research institute in the Faroes, Ocean Forests, and the University of Edinburgh. They produced a report from Fiscaling looking at what the best sites they mapped the best sites in the Faroe Islands. There was some similar work done by an MSc student, Drew Resnick, in the Gulf of Maine, and he also produced a thesis looking at assessing the potential for commercial scale aquaculture on the edible brown algae, Aleria esculenta, which they also have on their farms in the Faroe Islands as well, but his work was focused in Maine. In terms of expansion in the Faroe Islands, this is a projected expansion from 2021 through to ambitious. They're going to expand from 2 sites. The colours in those bars indicate the sites. I'll just look for my pen. Yep. So on the bars, the different colours of the different sites, and you can see current production is around about 1 to 200 tonne. They plan to increase that to 3,000 tonne by 2025, and correspondingly on this side of the graph you see the amount of space that they're going to use. So they're only using a few hectares at the moment, but they believe they can expand to 3,000 tonnes and only use 100 hectares, which is a very impressive use of space. Reuse of aquaculture equipment, anchors and chains are one of the key things that they've looked at that they've found to be most suitable. They have a very long life obviously, but what they have found is that some of the earlier versions of these are now too small for the larger Mac rigs. Ropes obviously are a bit more difficult to reuse, they need to be clean, and the strength obviously needs to be assured before you start putting tension on these ropes. But what they have found is that by using reuse of equipment they can reduce costs by 41%, which is obviously quite a significant saving. Mechanisation has been an important facet of the development in the Faroe Islands, as it is with all industries, especially in offshore and sea-based production. They were doing it manually, and the yield per tonne per vessel per day was 15 tonne at a cost of 58,500 euros, very expensive. They've now mechanised it, and you see that the yield has increased to 75.6 tonne. Total cost down to 9.3, so a 5-time increase and an 84% decrease in cost. And they've just launched their vessel, which they're very proud of, specifically for mechanising the harvesting and the seeding of macroalgae in the Faroe Islands. So here we've seen where the production is planned to be expanded in the north of the Atlantic, particularly in the Faroes and in the Gulf of Maine. I'm just now going to apply or present some results from Nofima, where we're working right up inside the Arctic Circle in the north of Norway. And we have a project there called Macroalgae Aqua, where we're applying many of the concepts of AquaVitae. What we looked at there was the effects of site depth and sorry origin on the growth of sugar kelp in the north. And this is work that was done by a colleague of mine, Xin Wang, in conjunction with myself, so I have been involved in it. We tested 2 different sites. You see the sites up the top there, Kraknes and Rotsund, we call them. And we took mother plants from both sites, took them back to our hatchery, produced sorry, and then put them back out into the water. So sorry from Kraknes went out at Kraknes and Rotsund, and vice versa. These sites are just under 100 kilometres apart, which is the sort of arbitrary limit for translocation in Norway. These are the 2 sites. One was quite challenged in terms of the environment, one was not. You can see the Rotsund site had quite low salinities, particularly in the higher, in the 2 metre depth range, and also significantly higher temperatures. So the temperatures went right up to 14 degrees, which we think is approaching the upper limit, whereas both the salinity and the temperature at the Kraknes site was very stable and within the limits of what we would expect to be optimal. This work is all just being published, so it will be coming out shortly. These are the results in terms of growth, length across here, and weight across here for the 2 different sites. This is the Kraknes site, this is the Rotsund site. Remembering that the Kraknes site are the good growing conditions, Rotsund are the poor growing conditions. And you can see quite clearly that the Kraknes sorry grew significantly better in terms of both length and weight at the Kraknes site itself, which was better growing conditions. But when we move across to the poor growing conditions, there was no difference between the 2 sorry from the 2 different sites. There's a visual representation of that. These are the 2 plants grown at the Kraknes site. These are sorry from Kraknes, these are sorry from Rotsund, and then these 2 are the sorry that were grown from the Rotsund, at the Rotsund site. So you can see very significant difference in growth. So we concluded that site had the largest effect on growth, that poor site conditions overshadowed any growth genetic traits, and that good site conditions enhanced those genetic traits. And the soy origin has a significant effect on the growth. We think this is due to the genetic traits. It could, of course, be seedling quality coming out of the two sites. And we have now a garden GNE experiment set up for the next year to try and quantify that. So what's the impact on the industry? Most of the industry at the moment is based in the south or mid of Norway. And when you look at that, because there's a temperature gradient in Norway, north to south, south to north, warm in the south, obviously cold in the north, everything needs to be harvested in May in order to avoid the biofouling. We found that we can extend that season significantly in the north. Biofouling onset was as late as July, August, so with a product that needs to be harvested and post-harvest treated very quickly, this is a considerable advantage. We have repeat annual harvest possible because of the quite unique environmental conditions, 24 hours light for a considerable period in the summer in the north. And that's actually been trialled by the Faroe Islands. They're very keen to bring it across and try it in Norway. And we're just attempting to get some funding to test an ocean rainforest Macroalgae in the north of Norway now in a more exposed site. So I think that's a really good example of the results from AquaVitae being used by a project outside. So the road ahead is a bit of summary. Selective breeding is obviously important, both to increase yield and lower costs. We've seen that quite clearly in the results in Norway. Mechanisation is obviously important in terms of reducing costs and also utilising reuse of used equipment. Potential for kelp cultivation across the Atlantic and other areas we believe is huge, and we would like to include the the Arctic in that, because we believe we have some fairly unique growing conditions that suit the species particularly well. And obviously you need to adapt to local conditions. There's no one solution fits all for any site. It's going to be very site specific. This is the motto from Ocean Rainforest. This is Erd speaking. It's a local ocean rainforest all around the world. That's what we're trying to achieve. And on that note, I just want to thank the entire team at Ocean Rainforest, Erd of course, and also my colleagues at Nofima for the work that you saw in the Arctic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex already the hands raising.
I'll do my best to answer questions on behalf of Erd.
Hi, first of all, my name is Algae from Kent University, Belgium. Thank you for the presentation. It's quite an interesting project. You mentioned in one slide that reusing the mooring systems such as chain, ropes, buoy, anchor, it could reduce the cost. But how is it with the structural integrity? I mean, do you have certain guideline to follow when you design the system by reusing the previous or another systems? Thank you.
Yep, that's a very good question. My understanding is that the hardware like anchors, chains, works quite well for reuse, but obviously things like ropes, no, not at all. So I'm not sure I've answered your question, but I'm very happy to put you in contact with her directly, and I'm sure she'd have a much more comprehensive answer. Yep.
Any other questions?
Hi, Eric Malcolm, thank you for your presentation. What we see in Saccharina in the southern region of the distribution, that seems to be moving upwards due to climate change. Does this also open more possibilities in the Arctic?
We're not quite as far north as you can go in Norway. Certainly the very north of Norway, yes. I think it does actually, as you know, possible rise in water temperature. The species is stressed by higher water temperatures, so I can for sure say the whole of Norway, I think in the north, is open for cultivation of this species. Yes, definitely. Other areas, who knows, maybe we can go even further north. I think it does. In short, yes, absolutely.
Any other question?
Thanks for your presentation. I was actually interested in the way that you're growing the seaweed. So is this more in areas that are more controlled, like a lake, where maybe you might have eutrophication or problems like that, or is it really just open ocean?
Okay, now this is marine species, so it's purely open ocean. And in fact, the ocean rainforest, many of the sites, it's quite difficult to find sheltered spots in the Faroe Islands. So they've really worked hard on producing rigs that handle oceanic conditions offshore. Not oceanic, but what they're calling offshore. And there's quite a defined definition of what offshore is. So it's only marine and what they're calling exposed sites.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then in terms of your production, you said you were really thinking of increasing it up to 5 or 6 times. Have you thought of how you will provide the nutrients for all these microalgae?
Again, that was part of the report. They looked very closely at the nutrient availability, especially around the Faroes. So again, this is a specific question to ocean rainforests, but those reports there's a very good report from Fiscaling on why and how they set the criteria for selecting the sites, and I'm happy to forward that to you.
Thank you.
Just a curiosity. Do you have any idea how your costs compare with the wild catches of the same species?
That's an interesting question. I know in Norway this species is not harvested from the wild. No, I can't answer that question, but it's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to compare at least that wild harvest in Norway is mainly focused on alginates. So it's a very different type of post-harvest production. The two are not, at the moment at least, are not comparable, but I think it's a very...
This is like fisheries in aquaculture, it will happen. What is happening?
Yes, yeah, true. It's a very interesting question.
Philip, thank you very much.